Okay. Welcome to the Orange Water and Sewer Authority Board of Directors work session this Thursday, December 13th, 2018. Making several announcements that Jeff Danner may be a few minutes late today. We're also waiting for Rob Epting, our general counsel, and Bruce Vaughn may be running a few minutes late as well. Does any board member know of any conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest with respect to any item on the agenda tonight? Okay. Our special work session on Wednesday, December 19th, 2018 at 6 p.m. in the OWASA boardroom to discuss communications and community engagement. That's a special work session that the board has. Ray DeBose, you have 3 announcements to make?
Yes. The Finance Committee met on Wednesday, December 5th, last Wednesday, to review financial analyses related to the committee's previous discussion of longer-term approaches and strategies for managing operating expenses, and also to review a draft of the fiscal year 2020 budget calendar and planning assumptions. Information provided by staff highlighted the operating expenses that make up most of OWASA's total annual operating expenses and identified the primary drivers that determine the amount of the expenses. After we reviewed and discussed the information, the committee chose not to pursue projects to identify and implement new innovative approaches to operating the utility at this time. And we arrived at, it was well attended. We had 7 board members there, and we arrived at that after some discussion. But staff will continue its practice of looking for ways to optimize operations, manage costs, and watch for innovations and focus on system resiliency. The fiscal year 2020 budget calendar and planning assumptions will be discussed at the board meeting on January 24th. A meeting of members of the, that's the first announcement. Any questions about that? You know, you were not there. Okay. The second announcement is that we'll be meeting, Jody and I will be meeting with the Orange County Board of Commissioners, Penny Rich and Markopoulos, and the Orange County appointees to the, well, that's us, to the Jody and me, Wednesday, January 30th at 8:30 a.m. in the OWASA boardroom to discuss items of mutual interest. And then the third announcement is that Jody, Yinka, and I will provide OWASA's annual update to the Orange County Board of County Commissioners on Tuesday, February 19th at 7 p.m. at Southern Human Services Center in Chapel Hill.
Okay, thank you. Bruce, before we continue, I just wanted to make sure you didn't have any conflict of interest with any of the agenda items. Okay. John Young, you have an announcement?
The Natural Resources and Technical Services Committee met yesterday to discuss forest management, and all of our committee members, Bruce, Jody, John Morris, and myself were there, as well as Bob and Ray. And we also had 3 members of the public who were actively attending, and we're glad they attend and hope they'll continue to join us along with others. We did 2 things. One was, well, first of all, I want to acknowledge that John had done a lot of deep thinking around this topic, and that was one of the sources of information that helped us move quickly. And so I wanted to just shout out to John, our appreciation for his work on that, as well as staff also doing the same kinds of things in parallel and ultimately converging. So the 2 things we accomplished was to outline a path for how we would, a process for developing our plans for managing forest lands, and also just really initial feedback on the guiding principles for managing those lands. I won't say we spend a lot of effort in there. There's more to come. So based on that, the staff will be fleshing both of those elements out, the path forward and the guiding principles, and we'll present that to the full board on January 10th at our work session. And assuming the board, gives a go-ahead or makes modest adjustments to that, the next steps for the staff will be to develop a community engagement plan, and also to begin working with our forestry consultant to identify up to 10 forested stands that would be first priorities for us to begin managing and developing an approach with. So with all of that, well done by the team. We decided we do not need to go forward with the December 20th meeting that we have on the calendar. So we're going to cancel that meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. Any other board members have announcements to make? We have a staff announcement?
Yes,
Okay.
Mary Tiger, Sustainability Manager.
Hi, I'm Mary Tiger. I'm the Sustainability Manager. Wanted to give you all an update on the analysis of the November 5th water main break that we have engaged Hazen and Sawyer to conduct. We were originally expecting the results of their analysis, which is looking into the root cause of the main break in front of the Jones Ferry water treatment plant, as well as our response to that main break and recommendations that we can undertake to avoid similar situations moving forward. We were originally expecting that report tomorrow. Staff received a draft version of the report last night, and after review of it, decided that we would like for Hazen and Sawyer to do a little bit more analysis, particularly into our operations of the valves to isolate the main breaks. So we've given them a few more days to work on that. We are now expecting a draft report on Monday and to be able to release the final report on Wednesday. But our goal is really to get a complete and accurate and actionable account of what happened. And so we'll be working with them. We don't expect that they'll need more time, but we'll be working with them if they do. Happy to answer your questions if you have any. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So Mary, are you gonna distribute that to us as soon as it's
Yes.
final?
Once it's final, we will distribute it to the
So
board.
We can look
As-
for it next week sometime, is it?
Yes, that is our hope. And after we distribute it to the board, we'll distribute it to stakeholders, and it'll be posted on the website as well. We've asked for a concise executive summary that's digestible, as well as a report that's appropriate for the public.
Okay, thank you. Any additional comments by staff?
No, thank you.
Okay. Any additional comments, suggestions, or information by board members? So moving on to our consent agenda, we have 3 items. The proposed key focus areas for OWASA's executive director, position reclassification for maintenance coordinator, and minutes of the October 25th, 2018 meeting of the Board of Directors. I understand we have one public comment, Meg Holton from UNC. Did you want to speak now? Okay.
Is it on the consent agenda, Meg, or an item later?
Items 1, 5, and 7. So I don't know if that was from the consent agenda. 1 is from consent agenda, and 5 and 7 are from regular agenda.
Yes, this falls across those. My name is Meg Holton. I work for UNC Energy Services as the Water Resources Manager. I'm commenting on the agenda items relating to water resiliency and also staffing. I believe these fall under items 1, 5, and possibly item 7 regarding the strategic plan. The recent water events of the past 2 or 3 years have brought to the forefront vulnerabilities in our water system that can impact the university and UNC hospitals in a number of serious ways. The potential for a lack of potable water or water pressure is of great concern. A lack of water impacts UNC hospitals in providing medical services to take care of the patients on hand and to accept new patients. A lack of water impacts the ability of the university to function fully, including in clinics, research, in housing, and serving the university community, and to provide university-supplied utilities to both the university and UNC hospitals. A lack of water pressure impacts use of buildings, as this can impact whether there's sufficient pressure for firefighting or for water on the upper floors of buildings or in buildings located at higher elevations. We're interested in and planning to work with OWASA regarding improvements that can be made to improve the water supply resiliency. We've met with OWASA staff regarding water resiliency and are looking forward to working with staff as the plan develops. I've worked with your staff for a number of years and observed the thoughtfulness and professionalism they've brought to their work and their proposals to the board regarding system improvements. To help this effort, we support the request to you by your staff for both a comprehensive look at water system resiliency and the additional engineering support, which will also help with this effort.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other public comments regarding our consent agenda items? Any board members have any questions or comments regarding any items on the consent agenda?
I move the consent agenda.
Okay. Question?
I would like discussion of the first item on the consent agenda. And that's great that Bob made the motion. Not yet, but maybe there's one out here.
So is it regarding the resiliency?
No, this is for item 1, the focus areas for the executive director. Should I go ahead? I think there's been some discussions on emails about, can we come up with some more concrete or tangible measures of our goals in the diversity and inclusion program. And, I'm one of the board members who thinks along that line. I realize it's kind of a squishy area to pin down into some kind of measures. I saw recently, and perhaps some of the other board members haven't had a chance, Ed Kerwin responded at 4:30 with some ideas about things that the team might begin to measure, and they sound pretty good to me. What I'd suggest, given that we have, I think the best practice is it's hard to set a goal or a target if you've never measured these things before. So I might propose that we add to the expected results simply that we're going to have a handful of measures selected and begin measuring those so that we can establish a baseline for the future and consider that one of the expected results for the year. So I propose that to the board and to Ed.
Good by me.
That's kind of how when I saw Ed's comments, that's basically what it looked like but I think stating that clearly makes more sense.
Yeah, stating it as a goal that we're going to have a measurement system. Yeah, okay. I'd like to second the motion.
Okay, so a motion made by Bob Morgan, second by John Young. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, thank you. So now we're moving on to our regular agenda. We have a resolution awarding a construction contract for gravity sewer rehabilitation. Vishnu Gangadaran, engineering manager for capital projects.
Vishnu Gangadaran, I'm the engineering manager for capital improvements program, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to reintroduce Allison Reinert, our utilities engineer, to the board. She's been with us since October of last year, so it's been about a year. At a work session, I introduced Allison and talked about her background and what a great background she had for this position. So now I get to reintroduce her, and now we're not talking about potential but actual. So in the past year, she's done just a fantastic job with the assignments that we've given her, and we've given her some doozies for sure. But she hasn't had a lot of opportunity to come before the board. That will change in the coming months because she's got a lot of large and complex projects that she'll be engaging the board on. But tonight, the contract that's before you is part of one of those large assignments. She's essentially taking on what I consider a sub-program in the CIP, the management of the collection system as a whole. So she's got a few different projects that really drive the direction of how we manage our gravity sewer collection system. So she's going to talk about that tonight. So without further ado, Allison Reinert, our utilities engineer.
Hi, and I'm Allison Reinert, utilities engineer. And tonight I am going to be talking about the gravity sewer rehabilitation program and the contract that we do hope that we can award. So OWASA operates and maintains approximately 329 miles of sewer system. And of that 329 miles, there's a variety of ages and different types of material and different sizes of material. In addition to that, we also have over 10,000 manholes, which are the access points for us to actually see into our collection system for sewer and access it in different ways for maintenance and inspection. So with that 329 miles, there comes a lot of challenges with it. So we had to find a way to prioritize those challenges. And the master planning efforts do that. They prioritize and identify rehabilitation and replacement needs. And really that all started back in about 2011 when we kicked off a master plan study. That particular master plan included condition assessments. So what do our pipes look like? Are they cracked? Are they broken? Are they perfectly fine? Capacity assessments. So how much sewage is actually flowing through them? Are we full? Are we partially full? Do we have lots of room to expand? And then both of those pieces actually go into a calibrated hydraulic model, which help to inform some decisions about where capacity is being used, how the wastewater is flowing, and those sorts of things. So that 2011 master plan really created a framework that helped us to prioritize different rehabilitation and replacement needs. And that framework does focus heavily on risk assessment. So what is that condition and what is the criticality of that pipe? So we're looking at those two factors in working in conjunction with one another to understand the probability of failure and then the consequence of failure. So since we are taking a risk-based approach, we're looking at an ongoing field-based condition assessment to help guide that rehab and provide additional information so we can categorize that risk in our best manner forward. And so what you're looking at on this particular slide on the right-hand side is a risk matrix where we're looking at the impact of criticality and condition, where the value of 1 would be the least critical or the best condition, and the value of 5 would be the most critical or the worst condition. So the Sanitary Sewer Evaluation Study Program, which is part of our CIP project, 27617, does evaluate sewer mains. And since we do have 329 miles of sewer mains, we can't look at everything every year. So that evaluation of condition is done on a priority basis. So we're trying to look at the highest priority mains, the most critical mains. And the way that we do that inspection is through camera inspection. So those manholes, those access points to the actual sewer system are how we gain entrance into looking at the condition and the criticality of those pipes. So we actually have small cameras that can either run on what almost looks like a little radio car, or can run on a stick where you can put it down in the manhole, and they perform inspections that way. And you can actually look at video of what's going on inside the pipe. And I'll show some pictures of what that looks like here in the rest of the presentation. But if we do look at that 5x5 matrix of criticality and condition, I want to highlight the fact that the area in red in the upper right-hand portion, those are our highest priority mains, and I'm happy to report that those have been rehabilitated and those have been, of course, inspected prior to that rehabilitation. We are also finished with the yellow area, which is high priority as well as the purple in terms of inspection. And part of the program that we're asking for award on tonight is part of the rehab work that's taking place in both the yellow and the purple areas. So we are working from the highest priority pipes and down. So getting those highly critical pipes taken care of first, and moving into our next highest priority. So since we're constantly working on this rehab, I mentioned we had already been working on those highest priority levels in the red, and now we're moving forward. We are constantly improving our sewer collection system through our CIP projects, and particularly we're focusing on the CIP project, which is the rehabilitation construction, so 27618. And that's really been going on since about 2012. And since then, we've rehabilitated over 11 miles of pipe, but we've inspected quite a bit more than that. We've inspected over 150 miles of pipe. So of our sewer system, we've inspected about 50% in the last, six or so years. And based on those inspections, a lot of the rehabilitation kind of boils down to some typical techniques. And the main one that we use is installing cured in place pipe. And the picture on this particular slide is an installation near the hospital where we actually did do the cured in place pipe liners. And what happens in that particular installation is you have a somewhat flexible pipe. You can see it there. It's white coming out of the truck. And they invert that into the pipe. So they pull it into the existing sewer pipe, and then it cures via steam or water, and it actually hardens into its own structural pipe. And so what we're doing is we're essentially creating a brand new pipe within an existing old pipe. So should that old pipe ever fail, we would have a sound, structurally good pipe within that. So it's essentially, we're completely trenchless in most of these installations. We do occasionally have to replace small segments of pipe, which do require some digging. And then we also do service connections and cleanouts, because many portions of our older system may not have required cleanouts when it was originally installed. So we're trying to bring things back to our current standard as we're making these rehabilitation projects move forward. So this rehab does extend the useful life of our infrastructure. It reduces inflow and infiltration. So we're really treating the wastewater that our customers are actually producing rather than groundwater or stormwater. It helps us maintain our permit compliance, reduces sanitary sewer overflows, and just provides some general information on sewer connections. And I know there's a lot of pictures on this particular slide, so I'll walk you through them. In the upper right-hand portion of this slide, the pictures are actually of OWASA personnel and staff, as well as our consultant and contractor, all taking a look at some actual cured-in-place pipelining being done. It was a little site visit I had arranged for staff and for others to be able to actually see what that looks like. This other one is just an aerial crossing that's been rehabilitated. Aerial crossings are one of our more critical pieces of infrastructure. Should those fail, that causes a major concern. So we want to make sure that those pieces of infrastructure are well taken care of, well looked after. And then this upper right-hand portion is if you were looking down a sewer pipe. So you're standing at one end, and the sewer is actually flowing through the pipe. So what we're looking at here is the cross section of the pipe. And at the top, what kind of looks like fireworks there is actually water getting into our sewer pipe. So this is not wastewater. This is probably groundwater or some sort of storm water. And that's maybe because of a crack or a break in the pipe. So it's showing that there's a problem here and it would require rehabilitation or replacement. Kind of same thing at the bottom. There's a small picture of if you were looking again down the pipe, that pipe is shown to be broken. So we can see different fractures of that pipe, and I'll try not to get in Inka's eyes with this little thing. So down here, that's the one I was referring to. And then on the right, I'm changing kind of your orientation a little bit, and it might be difficult to see with the lights on, but we're essentially standing over top of a manhole, looking down onto the wastewater coming through the pipe. And so there's a wastewater flow going this way, and then there's also a wastewater flow going this way. And you might be wondering why one of them is green, but we are out there actually dye testing people's homes to test where their sewer actually came into the sewer system. Because like I mentioned before, a lot of homes that were built kind of earlier, but maybe before OWASA was actually the owner of the sewer system, don't have cleanouts. So we don't know where their actual connections to the sewer system may occur. So the green dye is a sewer approved dye. You dump a little bit in someone's toilet, flush it a few times, and then have a couple folks stand at different manholes, and you can tell where their wastewater comes out. We've had some interesting conversations about why is my wastewater green, but that's for another time. So like I mentioned before, we are looking at both the condition and the capacity when we're evaluating different sewer rehabilitation and replacement plans. And capacity improvements aren't widely needed, but we are constantly evaluating that fact. So kind of leading into that, we've done our 2011 master plan, and it's time now for us to be updating again, since there is a lot of different development and things going on in the community. So our 2018 master plan is well underway, and we are using flow monitoring and hydraulic modeling on that particular study. And in addition to both of those items, we're also trying very hard to have close coordination with the town of Chapel Hill, town of Carrboro, Orange County, and our neighboring utilities that we have interconnects with. One example of this coordination is the Blue Hill District. Our engineering and planning groups have been trying to meet with them, and we're getting lots of good information about all the development that's planned in that area. Particularly that one's important because they've decided to fast track a lot of that development. So that master plan and that close coordination with the town will really help to inform our CIP program moving forward. So it's an ongoing program. It's always kind of rolling forward. Our fiscal year 17-19 program has already had 2 projects completed, 2 packages, and tonight we'll be asking to approve the 3rd package. And moving even further past tonight's meeting, we'll have additional projects forthcoming. We've got funding in the CIP budget over the next couple years to rehabilitate about 10 miles of sewer. So all of those miles have been identified as needing either replacement or rehabilitation through the inspection program where we're evaluating the different sewers. And so just to bring our focus back to the request tonight is that the third package for rehab is truly an investment in maintaining our sewer infrastructure. This package contains about 28,000 linear feet of sewer. That's a little less than 2% of the collection system that we have in our service area. It has a variety of different sizes. It'll again mostly be using that cured in place pipe lining technology. It will also include some point repairs where we're replacing small segments of pipe in various areas. It has 152 manholes getting rehabilitated. And again, that's close to a little less than 2% of our collection system total manholes. The firm that we're recommending for award is a MWBE firm, and they're expected to do about 25% of the actual work. In these types of contracts, you have a general contractor and then you have a lining contractor. So in this case, our general contractor is our MWBE firm. The award amount is slightly over $3 million. And that was within 2% of the engineer's opinion of probable cost. And again, we're asking for board approval of this particular item on page 4.12 of the agenda package tonight. And if you wanted another look at why we do rehab and how this really is an investment in our future, you can take a look at the pictures on the right-hand side. Of those two pictures on the left, that's before rehab where you see some cracks and some roots. And then after rehab, you can see a nice smooth pipe. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Are there any questions from the public regarding this agenda item? Okay. Board members?
Of course. So Allison, very good presentation. I'm impressed. Would you go back to your slide with the red boxes and the yellow boxes and
Absolutely.
and relate this project to that slide? You said all the red boxes have been done?
Yes.
That's
So
pretty
that was our
impressive.
original phase one work. And so that is complete. And so where we are right now is we are still working on the phase 3 work that was done for evaluation. We have gone through phase 4 of evaluation, which I'll try and highlight the areas. So phase 2 and 3 are covered in portions of the orange.
It doesn't show up on our screen.
I know, sorry. So phase 2 and 3 for evaluation, so for inspections, where we're actually physically looking down the pipes and assessing their condition, are in the orange and the first level of purple. And so that is the area where we are actually doing this rehab for this particular project. Phase 4 evaluations have also been completed, yet not rehabbed yet, not in construction, and that was the second level of purple. So some of those future projects that'll be coming for the funded projects in the upcoming CIP will be portions of the lighter colored yellow and then again that purple.
So when this project's complete, all of the red, the dark yellow, the orange, the gold, and the two top purple boxes will be complete?
With the exception of some areas that we don't have easement for just yet, but we are working on plans to obtain some easements and work on those areas.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
John?
Thank you, Allison. I appreciate that you've focused on this as an investment, and I think that's important for the work we do in our community. I'm curious about this cured in place pipe. It looks like a wonderful technology. I assume, is it some kind of an epoxy? And the reason I asked that is my question is, when, like in the last pipe scenario you showed the before and after, if you've already got cracks and roots growing in, how resilient is this material when there's already activity of invasion, that type of activity in the area?
So before they do the lining process, they have to do cleaning, and sometimes it's also deemed as like heavy cleaning. So they might have to go back and forth a few times, and that often will remove any debris or roots that are in that area because they use a jetter kind of system, and will push those roots right out. And so what you end up with is a relatively clean pipe, and they can also get through some minor defects. You obviously don't want to line through a pipe that's completely offset.
Right.
That would be a situation where we'd want to dig that up and reset a new piece of pipe and then line through that.
But aren't there trees that are, right on top of outside the pipe that are just dying to get back inside, right?
So what's nice about this compared to kind of traditional, either, we do it mostly on vitrified clay pipe where they've got joints where they can come together, and mostly where the roots and other things are coming in is at those joints. And so
Okay.
what we're creating here is I'll say, okay, I've got a 300-foot run between two manholes. It'll be a seamless piece of liner that'll go between those manholes instead of being, 20-foot sticks of pipe. So you have fewer opportunities for those roots to actually infiltrate into the collection system.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you for that explanation, because I was about to ask a question and you just answered it.
Good, that's my goal.
Anybody else? Okay, so we do need an action approving the resolution on page 4.12, which is the resolution awarding a construction contract for the gravity sewer rehabilitation fiscal year, is it 17-19 package 3 project.
So I move the resolution.
Okay, so resolution made by Ray, second by John Morris. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So now we're going to go to our regular discussion, proposed resources for capital improvements program execution and water distribution system maintenance. We're having Mary Dar begin with first.
Yes.
Okay.
Good evening, Mary Dar, Director of Engineering and Planning, and I will be co-presenting this item tonight with Todd Taylor, our General Manager of Operations, as well as Stephen Winters, our Director of Finance and Customer Service. So as was discussed at the November 15th board meeting, we're requesting additional resources to support both our capital improvements program as well as our water distribution system valve maintenance program. I'm going to start out talking about the resource needs for our engineering and planning department, as well as a proposed capital improvement project. So the first is our request to add a 4th utilities engineer. So as you could just see through Allison's presentation, our utilities engineers really act as project managers for our capital program. Typically, each project manager right now is managing between 15 and 20 capital projects through the early conception stage, through, as Allison's project, through construction. The utilities engineers also lead the community relations efforts for these projects. And I know you saw the map in Allison's item where there are locations throughout our service area. She's going to be coordinating the community relations with all the neighbors of those projects. It's really a time-consuming effort. With our capital improvements program at nearly $100 million, the 5-year program, and that same level of effort extending into our long-term planning, at least out 15 years and beyond that, we've looked at the resources we have in engineering and have and the staffing, and determined that to sustain that level of investment, we need additional resources in our staffing. In addition to just managing capital projects, we've found that more and more we're being called upon as a technical resource for the organization, working with Todd's operating groups, water supply and treatment, wastewater treatment, distribution and collection. Again, referring to Allison's presentation, she worked very closely with our collection system department and their staffing. Some of the TV work she referenced was done by our crews, some is done by contractors, and it takes a lot of coordination and support from our utilities engineers to make sure that we're coordinating with our distribution and collection and other operating groups. We also know that we're going to have additional workload from the distribution resiliency work that we're working on and that Meg commented on. You'll also recall earlier this year, the board approved our action plan for the water treatment and wastewater treatment plant reliability and risk assessment, which is additional project workload for our capital improvements. I've also communicated with Todd Taylor to, ask additional, so as our systems become, our treatment plants are becoming more and more complex, as well as our conveyance systems. And so there's just additional support from the engineering group that's needed to assist, as well as additional regulations that our utility engineers aren't just going to be project managers for the capital program. That's a very important part of their job and will be their main job. But again, we need to be a better technical resource for our operating groups at OWASA. We do have a current vacancy, so we have currently 3 utilities engineers. Recently, we had a vacancy with an employee that went to work for the state. So we do have that position advertised. We are hoping if we have a good pool of candidates and if the board approves our 4th utilities engineer that we could combine that recruitment, hiring, and training effort together for efficiency. We have made some interim adjustments to our staffing to cover our current vacancy, as well as we're going to potentially bring in some temporary staff for some administrative needs while we're doing our recruitment. The second request that we have for the engineering and planning department is to include a new capital project in the CIP to replace the water line that failed in front of the water treatment plant. It's a very complicated network of pipes and valves in front of the treatment plant, not just the pipe that broke, but the 2 adjacent pipes that we've been talking about. And so we're requesting to add a project that will replace those old pipes with a new pipe in a more simplified manner than what's currently out there. We're currently advertising for the engineering support to do that design. We would expect the design to get started here in fiscal year 19. Construction would not occur until fiscal year 2020, and the actual capital project itself you would see in the upcoming fiscal year 2020 budget process. And so those are the 2 requests: addition of a utilities engineer, adding this project to our capital program for engineering and planning. And I'm happy to answer any questions on that before I turn it over to Todd Taylor to talk about the valve maintenance program.
Quick question. Can you clarify? So when I'm looking at the resolution, we have sort of like 2 things in one.
Yes.
Correct. One is to get a new utilities engineer position and then also to reclassify a vacant position.
Correct.
Okay. And so for the second request, you were talking about something for the, not the valve. No.
My second request for the capital program, we don't need a resolution for that. If we can just get a nod, we're going to get the engineering underway, and the project will actually show up as part of the budgeting process. That's going to ultimately
Coming up.
Yep, that's coming up, and the board would approve that in June-ish.
Okay. Any members of the public wish to make a comment on this? Okay, board members. Jody?
Thank you. So I have a question about the valve maintenance process. I'm wondering if during the valve testing some sort of break or failure occurred, would repairs deplete the budget for further valve testing, or would that be paid for through some other item in the budget? But I wouldn't want one significant break, should it occur, to really reduce the amount of valve testing that's going on.
I think I would defer that question to Todd when he gets up and talks about the valve maintenance program, I think.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right.
So, Mary, you add an engineer position. You're hoping that this recruitment process will identify 2 excellent candidates and get them on board, but that's some months away. So is there anything else you can do to accelerate those high priority projects that we've been discussing since the unfortunate interruption?
So we've assigned projects to our existing utilities engineer. We've moved our engineering associate up into an interim utilities engineer position just to give that person the authority to directly manage capital projects. And it's a very competitive market out there right now for engineers, and I forgot to mention that in my notes, but it might take us a while to hire qualified candidates for the position, and we're and that's why we've made some of the adjustments that we've had with our current staffing, as well as bringing on part-time help to help with some of the administrative portions so that our project managers can dedicate their time to managing the capital projects and not doing some of the other administrative tasks that they're currently doing.
Okay.
But
Certainly support what you're doing.
thank you.
I do have one more question. One of the statements on the first page of the packet that we've received for this topic is that 81% of the budget over the past 10 years has been, of the CIP budget has actually been spent when the goal was to spend 90 to actually 105%. Is that because the utilities engineers have been working at their maximum? I mean, is that another argument for utilities
Yes.
engineer?
And we did add a third utilities engineer a little over a year ago, and that has helped. Last fiscal year, we actually were well over the goal at 120-some%. And there were a lot of factors that played into that. Some of it was staffing, some of it was the projects that were wrapping up at the time. But this year, our projection for the first quarter for this fiscal year, and that's before our third utilities engineer went to work for the state, we're projecting 80, I think it was 83% for this year. Yeah. Sure.
So if you are unsuccessful in finding, one or two, filling the vacancies for these positions, what is the backup plan at that point?
In the past, we have used, and it's to different degrees of success and cost. We have brought in, we've used temp agencies. It's not been very efficient for us, and that's why we haven't gone to that at this point. We have also actually hired staff from the consulting engineers we use, and it's a tremendous cost to do that at their hourly rates. But we have used those resources in the past. We're trying something a little different this time. It is a big hit when you have a staff of 2 or 3 and you lose one, we lose 30% of our project management capacity.
Well, if it's not successful, then you'll have a lot of lapsed salaries to.
Yeah, agree.
But
We think it'll be successful,
I know that's
Yeah.
very expensive and
yeah.
it doesn't help you in the long run either.
No.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Todd Taylor.
Thank you, Mary, and just for the record, I support all of Mary's requests for additional help. But the events of November 5th, it's not only just about aging infrastructure and things like that in that area that we need to focus on, but there's also the operation and maintenance side of it, and it brought really to the forefront the value of the valves that we have in our system and what an important asset that is, and how we need to manage those appropriately. We started on that. We recognized that years ago, and we started our valve maintenance program. And we bought a machine. We dedicated some resources to that, and we had a goal back then of trying to get through the entire system in 5 years of exercising every valve we had. Well, here it is 5 years later since we started the program, and we're about 2/3 of the way through the system. Of course, we ran into some issues out there of just, valves. Some valves are hard to locate, some are hard, accessibility issues and traffic control and all these other factors, have made it difficult to keep the production up in that area. So what we're asking for tonight is additional resources. We would like to create a crew dedicated to valve maintenance. The folks we have now are on a crew that has other responsibilities. They're just a part of that crew's overall charge. And what we would like to do is dedicate a crew to the actual valve maintenance program. And in order to do that, we feel like we of course need a crew leader to lead that crew. And then we would like to take the resources that we have put them into that crew, and then also add another machine and another 2 folks to run that machine. And we believe that, with double our capacity, production rates should go up as far as maintaining the valves. But that's on the preventative side of things. So, we're trying to prevent future events that we get into where we have difficulty with valves not working and valves being hard to access, things like that. And that helps us, prepare for those inevitable, water main breaks and things like that. But then it also, we believe, would help us on the response side of things. In this event that occurred out here, there were a total of 17 valves that had to be closed, and that's a difficult thing with one machine. And some of these valves were on 20-inch mains, and that's a very long process to actually close that valve. You're talking 45 minutes maybe to close that one valve with one machine and one crew out there doing it. And in a valve that size, it's almost impossible to close manually, with just by hand. So we think by having 2 machines, we get into a situation in the future where we were, faced with multiple valves need to be closed, and we'd be able to double what we were, the response would be more rapid. Let's put it that way, and we would hopefully be able to isolate the valves more quickly. So what we're asking for, I know there's a resolution in here. The crew leader position and the 2 positions we're talking about actually were positions that we have funded in the budget this year, but that were supposed to be reduced as a result of our AMI project. So we have the funds for those positions right now. The crew leader position is actually vacant. We have a couple of our utility mechanics that we currently have. We're a little heavy in that area because we were going to reduce those through attrition. So we can retain a couple of those positions. We can hire the crew leader. But a couple years ago, I know we came to the board with a request that there's different levels of utility mechanics that we have, and one of the highest level is a utility mechanic 3, and usually that's a person that backs up the crew leader, so that they're there. If the crew leader's absent, they can kind of act as a lead person for a crew. And then they're also, like in this situation, where you may have one crew working on this side of town and the other crew working on this side of town. You can have some leadership at each one of those areas. So one of the things that we are asking for is that we reclassify one of our existing utility mechanic positions into this utility mechanic 3 position. So that way all of our crews would have that resource as well, and that would be consistent in this new crew. So that's the one piece that we actually need the board. We need a nod from you that it's okay to retain the other positions, and then budgeting going forward that will reflect that, and we'll have those salaries in there. And then the other piece of that is that we want to reclassify this one position. And then the final thing is actually purchase this valve exercising machine. But I know we'll be back to you in January if you're good with that actual request. And that concludes my piece of the I was going to say that I know we got one question, and I'll do my best, Jody, to answer that. I didn't totally understand. I guess what you're getting at would be that we get into a situation and we've got a water main break such as this or something, and it depletes the entire, I guess you would say the main break line item that we have in our operating budget.
Yeah, I think I perhaps didn't express myself very well. It's not necessarily a break, but if you find that a valve, testing the valve, either the valve doesn't work or something breaks in the process of testing it. My question is, would the money to repair that come from the valve testing program, or is that another pot of money in the budget?
I think it depends on a number of factors. I think if it's an immediate fix, yes, it has to come out of the operating budget, and we have to make an immediate repair right then. If it's something that we could program in, maybe we've got several of these valves or something like that, maybe we could work with Vishnu to develop a CIP project where we go out or if it's a particularly challenging valve, I know in the past we've inserted new valves in areas and things like that. So if we've got some time to plan it out, we can probably go through the CIP process. If it's an immediate need, we get out there and the valve is broken and we have to call somebody to come in and do an immediate valve insertion, that's more than likely an operating expense. And then I know Stephen would say, that we have money in reserves and things to try and cover those things. Now, there's a limit to everything, of course. And
I think perhaps my question is very naive. It sounds like the valve crew will be continue doing its work regardless of whether they encounter an expensive situation of repair.
And one of the things that this request doesn't address yet, and it's something that we want to work on, is that not all valves are created equally. So some valves will be, are hypercritical, some are more critical, and some are not so much. And we may have like Allison was showing her 5x5 matrix there may be something similar that's developed for the valves, and the ones in the red quadrant there may have a different maintenance program entirely than the rest of the valves in the system. And that's something that we need to think through and look at as far as how we move the program forward, where those valves may be on a every year maintenance cycle where everything else is on this 3 or 4 year cycle or something. Well,
Todd, if we add the new crew, what kind of cycle does that put us on, from 5 to what?
My goal is to get that down to what I've seen and looking out at, at the industry, is the best I've seen, the most aggressive I've seen is around 3 years. They're trying to get to all their valves in a 3 year cycle. I would like to at least get back on track with the 5 year. But a lot of it will depend on what I was just talking with Jody about, is how do we, these critical valves, how do we address that? I mean, the city of Raleigh right now has a program where they're using a contractor to address those valves. They're assigning them to a contractor, because some of that work, let's say it's a valve at the hospital or something, that takes a lot of coordination, because there will actually be a water outage. So we may have to do that at 2 o'clock in the morning, or we've got a valve, let's say on Fordham Boulevard. We don't want to be out there at 9 o'clock in the morning, shutting a lane of traffic down, trying to operate that valve. So there may be things like that have to be, thought about, that our crew may be out in neighborhoods and other areas working on, all the other valves that are a little less intense effort, and we may assign other things to contractors, but we haven't worked through all that yet. Don't really even have an understanding of how many valves are we talking about that may end up in that red quadrant.
Okay, thanks.
Bruce and then John.
I support the request for additional resources. 2 questions for you. One on the machine and truck that will be, I guess, a budget request in a month or 2. And to the extent you can talk about that now would be helpful. And then the other on the roughly 33% of the valves left to be tested. I'll ask that one first. Is there reason to believe that we will proceed through those 33% at about the same speed that we have the earlier 67%, assuming we have the same number of people working on it, or have we sort of backloaded the bad ones into that 1/3? Any thoughts on that?
I would say it's a bit of both in that regard. I think we would want to address them, but again, like the previous 2 questions I was answering, we need to look into what's involved in some of this, because there are some in that final third that there's a reason we haven't gotten to those. But I think what we want to do is figure out a way, as many of those as we can do, we will certainly want to do ourselves. But if there's a need, for other resources to be brought in, that's something that we'll bring back to the board and say, we want to enter into this contract or something. Or we may, say, it's worth a little overtime, and we'll do a couple of these every month, and we'll pick a night and work it out. Because some of the stuff, like I was talking about with UNC, it's easier for us to coordinate and adjust our schedule maybe to meet UNC's needs of when we could shut it down than maybe it is when you got a contractor sitting here saying, I need work, I'm available, this week, but not this week, and those kinds of, because then you're dealing with so many schedules that it gets a little complicated. So I'm not saying that we will shy away from some of the more difficult valves, but I think there'll be a little more planning and things that have to go into that piece. But having the resources there available to address it when we get there will be very helpful.
And on the truck and the machine, roughly how much does the machine cost? How much does the truck cost? Do we lease equipment like that typically? Do we purchase it outright? And, if it's a conventional truck, would it make, because the total here is $130,000, which sounds expensive, but I have no idea how much these machines cost.
Well, and what we based our estimate on was the city of Durham just bought half a dozen of these trucks, or these machine and truck combination. I lump all that together because it's one unit. And we looked at what they had, and we liked that. What we have now currently is a trailer mounted unit, and it gets extremely long. It's difficult to maneuver in some of the neighborhoods, things like that. And then you've got a truck that's kind of dedicated to that you could use for other things, but 95% of the time what we're seeing is it stays hooked up to this trailer. So it hasn't been, as versatile as what we had thought. So we think going this way, and then the trucks that we're also looking at have, or the units that we've been looking at have built in like traffic control. So they'll have like arrow boards and things built into the truck. So when we're in some of these more difficult situations right now, the truck and trailer have to go out, but they have to load up signs. They have to have all this, cones and things on the truck. And this truck will have that capability to store all that too, but then it'll also have these arrow boards and things like that. So it seems like it might be a little bit safer way of operating, and it also seems like it's it's a more complete package that you have there when you go out to do these valve exercising type tasks. And it's shortening that length of this thing too down to a more compact unit will help out with just getting around. And to answer your first question, typically we've purchased. I don't know that we've leased any equipment, but I'm certain that's an option. But Stephen can probably speak more to why we have gone the way we've gone.
Todd, I just want to make sure I understand this. Right now, we have 2 part-time utility mechanics that have distractions, and you're proposing a team of 4 utility mechanics plus a crew, and they're full-time dedicated to this. 2 questions I had relative to that is, did you look at a scenario where we had 1 full-time crew and a part-time crew with distractions to kind of supplement them and back them up during critical time periods? And also, do you see this as a long-term appropriate team size, or is this in part to kind of get the program up to a standard you're seeking, and then it would be easier to maintain, and maybe you could reassign 1 or 2 in?
It's possible. I mean, I could see it being very dynamic. We know what we've seen so far and what we've been able to produce with what we have, and what we would like to do is go down this road where we're really dedicated. I think part of it is just staying focused. If that crew's main focus is on these tasks, we'll get more productivity out of it. And then later on, if we find out yeah, we don't, now because we're focused on it, we can, and I will say that the crews are very fluid. If there's, 3 people get sick on this crew and they've got something that needs to get done, we will adjust and move people around as needed for those kinds of things. So I think all of that is very possible with this, but, and one of the things we're doing too is, to your point of, are we taking resources away from this other crew and putting them on here? This crew will be assigned a couple other tasks besides valve exercising, but that dovetail into what they're doing very well. One would be our air release valves. They would be responsible for maintaining those, which is a little bit whole different exercise, but we have several of those around and they require some maintenance. And then also our what's called a unidirectional flushing program that we have. It requires a lot of valve opening and closing throughout the system to be able to perform that. So it fits nicely with this group because you can knock out 2 birds with 1 stone of you're exercising the valve, but you're also performing this unidirectional flushing of the distribution system. So some tasks will be shifted to this crew that are currently kind of dispersed among other crews, and we think that will also help the other crew relieve some of the workload from the other crew.
This might be a Mary question, but do you ever come across, or do you think this would ever come across where your team would come out and exercise valves and then realize, hey, there's like a 600-yard stretch where there are no valves? Did that happen with your team, or would that, discuss that with Mary's team, or is that something that would ever be on the radar?
I think it's a possibility, and I think one of the things that when I'm thinking about these critical valves, that is one area where, if we identify this project that Mary was talking about where we're doing the water main prioritization, if we were to identify a main that is a critical main, and then I think one of the things we got to look at on that is, okay, what's our valving situation on this main? Do we have enough valves adequate to make sure that we don't end up with a situation where we've got I would look at it more from how many customers are connected to this line. If we can't get it shut off between here and here, not necessarily the length, but how many connections are on there, then maybe we need to put another valve in between there so that, we don't want more than, 500 customers to be out of water at one time, or, we set some kind of goal like that. So yes, I agree. I think that's a piece of this that we want to look at. It's not something I can give you, the immediate remedy to all that, but it's things that as we go through this resiliency work, that's something that we want to look at. I think valves are, again, it's been, it's brought to the forefront now of how critical those are and how, we need to make sure that we've got proper valving and they're in the right places and that we can access them and they're working when we need them to and all those.
I think we're ready for Stephen.
All right.
Stephen Winters, Director of Finance and Customer Service. And so we obviously did look at the budget impact of these decisions that are before you. And I'm going to try to keep this from getting confusing. And thought that maybe it's good to remind us that we really have 3 buckets of budget. We have a capital equipment budget, which is where the truck that we talked about, where that would fit. We have an operating budget, which is where the salaries for the personnel that we talked about would fit, and then the CIP budget, which is the budget that Mary talked about. We don't have any proposed changes to the current budget, as Mary indicated. That will flow through the budget process that we're about to go through in the spring. The capital equipment budget will definitely have to be amended to buy that truck. There's $870,000 in that this year, if I remember right, and it's all, a lot of it's already spent and some of it's spoken for, but we're going to go away and come back to you in January with a request for a budget amendment. We'll explain, where we are with the current budget and why we need and how much extra money we need. The operating budget, approving this resolution tonight by itself doesn't, rise to a budget amendment, an operating budget amendment. And I'm getting a little bit into the next section, but I think it's important because it will inform your decision. Between now and January, we will do a forecast of where we are with the operating budget. We've learned that we're spending more money on biosolids program because of all the rain. We've had to do some things that have cost more money, and there's some other areas of the budget that we're running over budget in, line items, and some that we're running under. So by the time we come back to you in January with a budget amendment request, we'll be able to give you a full picture of how these overages and unders fit in, and be able to say we think we're going to need extra X number of dollars in the operating budget, and have you vote on that. So that's the mechanics of the budget process. But then there's the impact on rates. So if we do all these things, how is that going to impact the projected rate increases that that we talked about in the last budget season? And so we've done the planning work around how these new positions, how this new piece of equipment, and some estimates of these other things like the biosolids program that I mentioned, how they would potentially impact rates. And it's in that next section, but based on our projections, we had a 3% rate increase projected for 2 years from now, fiscal 2021. Based on these estimates, that would need to be 4% and 3% instead of 3%. So, any increase is not great, but it's not these things will not have a significant impact on that. So I'm at the point where I'm happy to answer questions. The action item here is around that resolution that Yinka asked about earlier about the personnel change.
So any members of the public wish to comment on this agenda item number 5 that we've been discussing? Okay, board members, follow up, continuing discussion? Members?
So the same question about leasing, and if you don't have an answer now, that's fine. In January, whenever it comes up, it'd be good to look at.
Okay, thanks. We have not in the past, things like copiers and printers, but not at least since I've been here, not equipment. Doesn't mean we couldn't or shouldn't.
So we need to go ahead and approve or discuss, not approve, the resolution on page 5.5, which is the resolution of Orange Water and Sewer Authority to approve a new utilities engineer position and to reclassify a vacant utility mechanic 1-2 position to a utilities mechanic 3 position. Okay, so motion made by Bruce.
Second.
Second by Rashir. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, thank you. And then as I understand, we're not going to be approving to amend the capital equipment budget to purchase the valve exercising equipment until January 10, 2019?
Yeah, and I haven't even mentioned this to Ed, but I got to looking at the calendar and the holidays and all that sort of stuff, and January 10th is going to be tight. That's what we're aiming for, but there's a chance that might slide to the 24th. Because it's not just the finance department, we've got to get the whole organization involved in that.
Okay, thank you. I guess, Stephen, you'll be back up to review the status of fiscal year 2019 budget.
Yeah, and I've covered already most of the things that I wanted to, but just to run through some of the things that we're seeing in the operating budget that we'll give you more information about in January. The personnel changes we've talked about. We've spent or will spend about $50,000 on the consultants that are analyzing the event from November. The valve truck we talked about, well, that's not operating. The biosolids program that I mentioned that we're running over budget on. We had 2 hurricanes that we've prepared for. We anticipate that we'll get some FEMA reimbursements, but I really don't have any feel for when that might occur or to what percentage of our expenses that will cover. We have some consulting related to our diversity and inclusion program that was not in the original budget. And then next week, you'll hear from Linda about some communications activities that have some price tags associated with it that is also need to be factored in. So again, that will be all, we'll give you a lot more information about that when we come back to you in January.
Any members of the public wish to make a comment? Okay, board members? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we're moving on to the administration of strategic plan. We're supposed to have an annual review and update of just the strategic trends and utility planning issues. We're having Ruth Rouse.
Thank you. There we go. All right, so good evening. So this is an annual report that staff does for you each year. And what we do is we try to get out in front and look at things like growth and what the demands are in our service area and what are the impacts on our major infrastructure, such as our treatment plants. We also look at the environmental regulations that we see coming down the pipeline. And why we want to do that is so that we can anticipate and proactively plan for that, so we can get out in front of it and not be blindsided by things that might be coming down the pipeline. So there's no decisions that we need from you this evening, but any guidance or feedback that you have on the report or the presentation is welcome here.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Are the town's population estimates their estimate?
Yes. So what we're going to see this evening is that under most conditions, we should be able to meet our raw water demands. We do have Jordan Lake as a backup insurance policy should we need it. And as part of the long-range water supply plan, you all saw draft raw water supply projections last month, and we anticipate bringing those final ones to you in February. We don't anticipate the need to expand the hydraulic capacity of either of our treatment plants for at least the next 20 years, and could be longer than that. And a lot of that comes because of the efficiency that we've seen. So we've seen increased conservation and water use efficiency by our customers. The reclaimed water system with UNC is another reason for much of that. So I'm going to start with raw water supply. This graph shows the historic yield and projected into the future. So this yield is it's based on the drought of record, which for us was 2001, 2002. So that's a conservative estimate of how much supply we can get on an average daily basis over a year. You can see it jumps up when Cane Creek Reservoir came in line in 1989. So currently with our 3 local water supplies, so Cane Creek Reservoir, University Lake, and the Quarry Reservoir, we can get about 10.5 million gallons per day yield. You see that it dips down a little bit in 2025, and that's when we will take the existing quarry offline to drain it. American Stone has a permit to mine that where they are, which is adjacent to our existing quarry, until December of 2030. So that last stage in that last 5 years, they will join their existing mining operation with our existing quarry. So we'll have one big storage unit for the reservoir. Then we'd have to refill it with water from Cane Creek Reservoir, and how long that takes depends on weather conditions that occur after that mining is completed. So conservatively, we've estimated that it would be 2035. We're having weather like we are now, it won't take long at all to refill that. And once that happens, then we'll have about 12.6 million gallons per day. All right. This shows the historic actual demands, and it looks like we had a big increase here in the past year. This data is going through the end of June when you look at these on these graphs. So that's through the fiscal year. But in actuality, it's because we transferred a whole lot of water to Durham this past year. They were working on both their water treatment plants, and so we had a lot of water that we transferred to them through our interconnections with them. So we estimated what our raw water demands would have been if we had not transferred that water to Durham, and that's shown by that red dot. You can see that that's pretty consistent with what we've seen in recent years, and it's really very similar to what we saw in the early 1990s. So we did peak in that in 2002 as our peak raw water demand. And we've seen a steady decline from that. And that's really because of that increased conservation that we've seen from our customers. We also began recycling water at our water treatment plant in 2002. and reclaimed water went online in, I think it was March 2009. So if you look at the drinking water plant, our capacity is rated on a peak day because we need to be able to supply our peak day of water to our customers. And it's rated at 20 million gallons per day. And you see a similar type of demand that you saw in the pattern that you saw in the raw water demands. And it looks again like we had a big increase this past year, but when we account for that water we transferred to Durham, it's really pretty consistent with what we saw in the past. Our increasing block rate structure went into effect in October 2007. You can see that had a drastic impact on how much conservation we were seeing by our customers. And then in March 2009, the reclaimed water system went online. And for our wastewater treatment plant, their NPDES permit, that's the permit that they receive from the state, actually a federal government or federal permit, that allows us to discharge wastewater into Morgan Creek. And there's a flow limit in that's based on the max month of what you see. So what that is that you look at average all the flow in a given month and how that average comes out in that monthly flow cannot exceed that 14.5. That makes sense? And again, you look at the actual flows and we have seen a decrease from kind of that early 2000s. And we're currently at about 60% of our treatment plant capacity.
Is there a minimum flow
requirement? No.
Yeah. Okay.
Reclaimed water, we base that on a peak day capacity. We peaked in August, I think, of 2016. We were about 2.4 million gallons per day on that particular day. And if you remember back to our water treatment plant, if that had happened, now we would increase that peak day would be 2.4 million gallons per day higher. So that reclaimed water system really does a lot in extending the life of our water treatment plants. So I really want to give kudos to UNC for working with us on that program. And UNC doesn't anticipate having any major expansions to the reclaimed water system, but we can cost effectively expand it to 5.2 million gallons per day. So that gets us back to those key takeaway messages. I'm not going to repeat them for you again. I think I hit on the highlights. As you all know, there are many other graphs that were in that report. So if you have any questions on any of those as well, feel free to ask them. And I'll turn that over to discussion with you all.
Ruth, the population projections, do they take into consideration the growth of the university?
Yeah, Town of Chapel Hill's consider UNC.
Okay.
Yeah, John?
Aren't we now using that new approach to population projections that uses this regional approach that grew out of transportation planning?
Yeah, we used that in the demand projection report. We showed that one and compared it to UNC recently did a revised projection for a part of the State of the Community report. And I think her projections, depending on what year she started from, were on either side of the projections that came out of the community biz work that was for regional transportation. So they're all kind of in line with each other.
Yeah, I thought that approach was really very good, that you showed us a month or so ago for the long-range water supply plan. Yeah, this strategic plan, it's an amazing amount of useful information, very well organized. I noticed you said you revised it to put the latest USGS water source monitoring data in. Were there many more revisions to it, or is it sort of just?
That was the revision that was requested by the board last year, was that we look at some kind of water quality trend in the source water, and USGS just happened this past year to put together this nice report that we incorporated into it.
What would be the next steps in the long-range water supply plan process that would come to the board attention?
So you will see the final demand projections, and that will include, we did authorize, I sent you an email to get the Monte Carlo analysis completed on that. Also, Hazen's looking at they're doing a weather analysis to see if the recent wet years skewed our results at all, and any comments that we get from our neighbor utilities, as well as UNC or Chapel Hill or Carver or Orange County.
Thank you.
And yeah, and then it's March 14th. It's tentative. Water supply and demand management alternatives.
Right.
Would be coming to the board.
Because we want to get your blessing on what those alternatives are before we actually do the alternatives analysis, and make sure we're not letting any that you want to see slip through the cracks, or if there's some that you want to toss out that's not important to you, then we want to make sure you agree with those before we go through the analysis.
Jody? So, I have a couple questions for you and perhaps suggestions. In the section on page 7.17, the source water protection, I was interested to see that there's not even a sentence that I could find on the 10% of the Cane Creek watershed area that's in Alamance County. So I was wondering if you could perhaps mention that, and because you and I spoke once and you told me the requirements for land use in the other county that apply to this. I forget how you described it, but it was
so they have to meet what the state requirements are for a WS2 watershed. So they would have 2-acre lot zoning in that watershed, whereas in Orange County, the county has 5-acre lots. Similar to University Lake watershed, Chatham County has a 2-acre lot zoning, and Orange County and Scarborough have the 5-acre lots.
So you mentioned on that first page these bulleted 6 or 7 activities for watershed protection efforts, and I'm assuming that they don't apply to Alamance County. And I know this is nitpicking on 10%, but I think that's an important consideration. And I would like to see one sentence or two just to mention that there is some part of the watershed for Cane Creek Reservoir that's in another county. And they have these restrictions, and they're different from Orange County.
Yeah, I think probably the one that is most different is the stringent zoning and land use controls. That definitely is different. I don't have enough background, like I couldn't tell you about the ag BMPs. I would think that would have been within the watershed and it would have been available to any, but I don't really have good information on where we funded those.
Yeah. Well, I would request that this be modified just to include some mention.
We can absolutely acknowledge that.
Okay. And then I would like to make a couple comments about the water quality trends that upon which you're relying on USGS and other partners to contribute that. I would suggest an edit on line 2 of page 7.19 to say that USGS performs the sampling and analysis, because the comment that I have on chlorophyll A is that you note that it's a deficiency that this study done by this regional study done by USGS cannot have seasonal analysis of chlorophyll A. And I wondered if you wanted to talk with the researchers who are performing this sampling and analysis to find out what increased frequency of sampling would be required to produce meaningful results for OWASA. And is that an expense that would be worthwhile?
Yeah, and we do our own monitoring at the intake on both our lakes, and that, because I'm not going to have this, USGS is not going to do this nice report again next year. So that is one thing that we could be looking at is, the chlorophyll A that we sample. It's not necessarily implying, I don't I'd have to talk to our lab to see how it might differ from kind of some of the sampling techniques. But
Yeah. Well, earlier in your report, you mentioned one of the effects of climate change is that you're expecting is increased harmful algal blooms. And so I think, and I see you're working with NC State to do some monitoring in HABs and cyanotoxins. So I would encourage you to look at some long-term sampling solutions to this. And not, my understanding is NC State is just sort of a short research study.
Correct.
But you will want to have meaningful and helpful long-term monitoring of HABs.
yeah, John.
I was just looking at page 15, and I may have missed this, it may be somewhere else, but you were noticing that Cane Creek is a protected watershed. There's no treated municipal or industrial wastewater discharged into Cane Creek watershed.
Hold on.
There are livestock.
I'm looking to see where you are. I'm sorry. I'm looking at 7.15. You're on 15 of the actual document. Okay, gotcha.
7.24.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you.
So you say that there are livestock operations and private septic systems in the Cane Creek watershed, but I think the really big thing that we're focused on now is extensive fields where biosolids are applied by Burlington, I believe. And these fields are very close to the reservoir. They're very close to the tributaries. And we have detected a pretty high level of polyfluorinated chemicals in the reservoir, which we're not going to monitor for. So I would think that maybe, I know you've given us good reports on that elsewhere, but I would think that it should be reflected here if it's to be up to date. To me, that's the real issue in the Cane Creek watershed.
Yeah, and I do know that Burlington hasn't applied recently, but I know that they still haven't, to my knowledge, they have not made a decision on whether that's a long-term.
So it may be not a future issue, huh?
Yeah, I don't know I mean, I did see someone from Burlington a couple weeks ago and asked them about it, and they have not made a decision on it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Bruce?
So a question on the planning for a drought condition. In the report, the drought is referenced under climate change, and that's an appropriate place to have it, but there aren't any numbers around that. Is it your intent to have numbers in the long-range water supply report for the March 19 meeting in terms of how many days of capacity we have relative to sort of the worst case drought we've had in the last 15, 20 years, or some I don't know how it's normally calculated in the industry, but some numbers around that?
So, I mean, our yield is based on our drought of record, so we kind of know what that number is. I guess the question then becomes, do we anticipate, with climate change, or what's expected in this area is it will have relatively the same amount of rainfall, potentially a little bit more, but it'll come in stronger bursts. So we'll have more frequent storm events and more frequent droughts as well.
Or perhaps longer droughts.
And we do have that University of South Carolina student that's looking at kind of that drought question and how climate change may impact that yield. Her preliminary results seem to indicate that it's probably not going to have a huge impact on it. But I don't have any final information to share with you. I think the good thing about working with her is that it's free labor, but the bad thing about working with her is that it's free labor, so I don't have any control over her schedule. So
maybe I think I'm asking a slightly different question,
gotcha.
which is, and I don't know how yield is defined, but I'm thinking if we take sort of the worst drought that we've had or the longest drought we've had over the last 15, 20, 25 years, whatever, and how many days that was versus how many days of supply we have at the projected demand over the next X number of years.
Yeah, so
that
what
sort of thing.
we do have in our water shortage response plan, I don't know if this is quite getting at what you, but the number of days supply we have remaining is dependent on how much storage we have in the reservoir, as well as what our demand is at the time. So in our water shortage response plan, it has these kind of graduated step plans. So, and we have one for different levels of demand. So there's one for like 7 MGD, which is our current level of demand, 8, 9, 10 MGD, and by month, because there are certain months where we're seeing, right, or our reservoirs aren't filling back up, and it's spring, and we're not seeing them refilling, then we're much more concerned than we are if they're that level, you know, in October. So, so it looks at by month what the storage level is, and it's based on risk of getting below that 20% storage. I forgot to mention on that field that that's another level of conservatism that we have in that, is that we're assuming we don't want to get below 20% storage. That gives us about 60 days to find an alternative source.
So Ruth, we have also done some worse case scenarios. I don't know if this gets to your point, and it might have been before you joined us, but based on stream flow data, the drought of 2001-2002 has been our drought of record. And we took that drought and said, what if it was twice as long as it happened? What would our supply have done? And I know, well, were you here?
No, it was before my time.
Yeah, but so I think we can do some of those what ifs scenarios, because 77 years is hardly a tick of time, right, for the planet. So yeah, just how bad, how long a drought could we experience, and you know, test it that way. So you know, that might be useful.
Yeah, and
when we look at,
we do have a scope item for Hazen and Sawyer to look at kind of that risk, and to do some modeling analyses for us on that I think will get at what you're asking. Well,
I know, Ed, you were going to continue with the plan summary?
yeah,
Progress
yes,
report?
thank you. On agenda pages 7.69 through 7.77, as was our practice, I think, starting last year, we also update the board and public on items and tasks in our strategic plan. So I'll be happy to walk you through that if you want. I think it's information the board's very familiar with. But if you have any questions, of course, we're happy to answer those for you.
Any members of the public? I know we've already heard a public comment. I did have one question on 7.69 for Strategic Initiative 1 for the first action item where it says progress. I was kind of confused of the statement of the board agrees to goals and objectives to evaluate supply and demand management alternatives against on November 16, 2016. And I wasn't sure if it was against something from that date or if that's a typo somewhere.
That's got to be a typo, right, Ruth?
Page 7.69?
Yeah, that's got to be a typo we missed. Yeah, we'll clean that up. Thank you for pointing it out.
And board members? Jody?
Last comment you made was that Hazen and Sawyer is going to do some analysis on drought projections. Is it, at least that's what I understood you to say.
It's the risk of our water supplies. So like under different under different kind of scenarios, how often would we expect to go into one of our water shortage declarations, and how long might we stay in them?
Okay. So is it the University of South Carolina student who's doing a estimate of hydrologic extremes that we might
Right,
consider?
she's looking
Okay.
at under what conditions do we see impacts to the yield, and then taking that information and running it through a suite of global climate change models to see how likely is that to happen.
Okay. So she's not looking at flooding, she's looking at droughts?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Any additional comments? I did want to say I did like the summary reports and how it's broken down into actions and measure of successes. And I think that's really good, like a short snippet of what we're expecting to occur.
Thank you.
So now we're going to go ahead and move on to discuss water loss and non-revenue water key performance indicators. We have Mary Tiger.
Hi, good evening. Mary Tiger, Sustainability Manager. So as you all know, every month you get a KPI report, and it's a nice coincidence to have this presentation concurrent to the strategic trends, because when we think about the metrics that we look at, we kind of break those apart. The strategic trends are the metrics that we think make sense to track on an annual basis and report those to you and to the public. And the KPI report are those metrics that make sense on a monthly basis. It keeps them front of mind. And in our transmittal to you, when we send them, we try to point out trends and make note of things that we're seeing in that email. A few years ago, the board requested the opportunity to discuss the KPI report about every 6 months, just as a way to kind of check in on them. The first couple discussions, we looked at the whole KPI report, provided a little description of each KPI that's in there, and discussed what might be missing, what's meaningful, what's not meaningful, and just how to check in. And that's, I think, has been a good resource for new board members as well. It's been glad to share that analysis with them when new board members join. Earlier this year in January, we did our first deep dive into one of the KPIs. As really, kind of an opportunity to kind of peek behind the KPI and look at the strategies that are underway at the organization and things that we're doing to that impact those specific metrics. Many of the KPIs kind of inherently have a deep dive opportunity throughout the year. So in particular, I'm thinking about the energy metrics, and we have our energy management program that we look at every year. So there's kind of inherent deep dive structured already. But last January, we did a water main break KPI. And then the board selected for their next deep dive, for your next deep dive, a look at unaccounted for water, that KPI. And that's what you'll find in your agenda packet is a report on that, particularly focused on the AWWA water audit, which is something that we do every year and is reported, as you saw in the strategic trends report. But it's an industry approved and developed standard of really categorizing, breaking down all of the water that's used into the system, into revenue water and non-revenue water, and then kind of drilling down into that as well. So that report you have before you. I don't have a presentation. There's a lot on the agenda tonight, but certainly stand here as a resource for you to answer any questions that you have or help facilitate any discussion that you have. There are no action items necessary out of this. This is really for your benefit to really make sure that you have a good, solid understanding when you see that report every month. What we do want to say is that, based on the trends that we see in the annual survey, we don't see leaks as a major problem in our system, but we will continue to evaluate the applicability of leak detection technology, specifically as a mechanism for assessing the condition of our water mains. So that will be a consideration of the water main prioritization model that you've heard is what's the value of leak detection in condition assessment of our water mains, almost as a precursor to a break. We will continue to conduct that annual audit and present the results of those audits to you in the strategic trends report. And we have a really cool resource now that's getting mobilized in AMI to start thinking about how we can look at our daily water use. Now we can actually compare water use, direct water use by our customers to pump data. In the past, we've had this really kind of awkward interpolation of monthly reads that we use. It's also AMI should help reduce tampering, meter tampering. So when we think about the water that's lost to theft, hopefully it's a good resource to detect that early and nip that in the bud. And in this project, we have replaced about 2/3 of our meters, and so new meters should be more accurate. So some of that non-revenue water as well. So I'll leave that, turn it over to you all, and happy to answer any questions that I can or yield to the resources behind me as well.
Are there any members of the public that would wish to make a comment on this item? Okay, board member comment? Bruce?
On the different classes of loss, it's just a couple of boxes that I don't understand. If you could give an example. So this is 8.3. Authorized consumption unmetered. What's an example of that?
Unmetered authorized consumption would be some of the flushing that we do, some of the water use that OWASA uses that is not metered. So when we connect to a hydrant and are using water, that's an example of that.
Those would be unbilled.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't say billed. Billed authorized consumption that's unmetered. So we have.
We don't have any of that.
Okay.
Yeah, not applicable.
Apparent loss, unauthorized consumption, that would be like meter tampering that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one is the last box, leakage and overflows. What is an example of that that isn't a leakage in the mains or a leakage in the service line?
That's a great question. So the tool does not, it gets as close to real losses, and we don't break it down that way. So I haven't looked at what leakage on main, those definitions. So we just have looked at real loss. What an overflow might be.
I'm going to venture a guess. An overflow may be like if one of our elevated tanks, we were to accidentally overflow it and water went out. That would be what I would think that might be. As far as leakage, I'm not sure. It could be a similar thing where you've got a tank that's leaking or something like that. It's not a main, it's not a service line, but there's something like
that. So I did like how we, for the charts that you had several, one on 8.5 and one on 8.7, where we're comparing ourselves to our neighboring Georgia. It kind of makes me feel good that we're lower than what our neighboring states are, so that we're actually having less of a water loss impact. Yeah. Anyone else? So Mary, were you supposed to help us figure out what our next deep dive will be?
Well, certainly, yeah, open it up. So if, as what our next KPI discussion might be, there's options of deep dives, and we've discussed. First off, was this useful for you? Something interesting just to read over, which is the point of it. So we could either take another holistic view at KPIs in 6 months, and typically this is one of the agenda items that if it gets packed full, it gets punted, so it's not always 6 months on the nose. But we could take another kind of holistic view, step back, do a kind of gap analysis of the KPIs and discuss their overall meaning, or do another deep dive. As I've mentioned, there's inherently kind of check-ins on a lot of them.
Mary, when is our next, you mentioned that some of these are covered in, big topics that we have. Do we have energy management as a topic on our agenda?
I believe it's scheduled for the second meeting of March.
Yeah. Okay. You know what, I think Bruce would love to do a holistic look at our metrics. I'm voting to have Bruce's input on this. That's not you? I figured that was all right down your alley.
And it's not something that has to be decided tonight either. So we can just kind of keep it on the 12-month and touch base on it. Mm-hmm. Sewer overflows, anyone?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks.
So now we're going to go ahead and discuss priorities for Natural Resources and Technical Services Committee. John, you're heading this for us.
Okay, first thing I'd like to do is change the title of it because I think it's really about the priorities of natural resources and technical services activities at OWASA. I think this topic originated, Ed and I were talking about long-range water supply plan, just as a regular board member, not as a committee chair or committee member. And, I was interested in how that was unfolding. And so we've done a lot of activity. This was, gosh, back in August, maybe,
Yeah.
roughly. So obviously since then, there's been a lot of activity, a lot of effort put forward on long-range water supply plan, and as well on some of these other priorities you see here, the forest management and the source water protection and sampling. I think the question that arose back then was the staff's priorities and their resources and abilities to kind of drive on all these issues at once. I actually don't think the committee is the critical resource in more ways than one, but I think we have a committee that seems to have all the time that we would want to devote to these issues. So I thank the committee for that, but I don't think that's the bottleneck. I think it's more about staff priorities. Ed, would you concur with that?
Yes, and I also think, the NERTS meeting we had on forestry management just yesterday, right, was really focused, really productive, and I think what the committee is proposing is very manageable, doable for staff, similarly with the long-range water supply plan. So I think staff is comfortable now, and we don't need further direction from the full board on our priorities and things. And I think as we, bring back to the board at your first January meeting of forestry management, there may be some additional tasks. The full board will ask the NERTS committee follow through and work with staff on the forestry management. Regarding PFAS, I know, Chair, you and I want to talk about some of the questions you raised on that. So, I need to get back to you on that. And the drought response operating protocol, we're about to have the wettest year on record. So it's not a driving priority. And of course, the board's well aware of our work on water system resiliency and some of the other activities. But, given the efficient work and the approach we're doing on forestry management and others, we're comfortable that it's doable, manageable, and we also appreciate your help with resources earlier tonight for the engineering department and our valve maintenance. So, I think, John, when you and I first discussed this, back in August, we were concerned we were getting backed up, but I think we're in a good place, all things considered. So it's.
And that's great to hear. And I just, to me, the only question would be I agree. I mean, I think that's how I feel as well, that we've kind of got the efficient model going. That said, I would love to ask you and your team if the expanding burden of reliability and resiliency, that focus is impacting any of these priorities, or you feel like everything's
It's our responsibility to let you know if we believe it is. So yes, we will. Count on us to do that.
Okay, that concludes the presentation on this agenda item.
Any members of the public wish to make a comment? Okay, board member comment?
Yes.
Jody?
Throughout the meeting, the idea of some of the implications of climate change come up a number of times. And one is increased frequency and severity of floods. And a couple consultants, paid and unpaid, are projecting drought statistics, but I don't see anything of flood predictions and the consequences of increasing severity and frequency of floods on the wastewater treatment system. And I think that might be something we want to put, or at least have staff consider, is it worthwhile putting that on some of the NERT's agendas, future agendas? So I would suggest we leave it up to staff to ponder and see if it's worthwhile.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you. So now we're going to go ahead and review our board work session. Are there any members of the public that wishes to comment on that? Okay. Ed?
Okay. As you know, the board will have a special work session next Wednesday, December 19th at 6 p.m. in the OWASA boardroom. And the sole topic of that meeting is communications and community engagement, something that we had to cancel because of floods, I think it was. And then your next regular work session will be Thursday, January 10th, 6 p.m. here in the OWASA community room. And you'll receive an update on employee health and dental insurance, looking ahead to next fiscal year, what that might be. You'll get an update on our affordability outreach program. As we talked about a couple times, we'll present the NERTS Committee's recommendation on forestry management framework on January 10th. Tentative will be a budget amendment that, as you heard Stephen say, that may or may not be ready for your January 10th meeting. And then the board will have a closed session, and we'll be discussing confidentially some of the security measures that are in place or planned for protecting our information and our instrumentation systems at the treatment plants. And on the 12-month schedule, we have updated that, and Andy, that's at their place tonight, I think. A couple of those I'll highlight. To your February 14th work session, we added a review scope of the distribution system prioritization model. As you know, that was already in our capital improvement program for this year, and we talked about how that scope may be expanding to include some of the resiliency, reliability work in our distribution system, and the board asked to see a copy of the scope of work before it was finalized. So we think that rises to the level that it belongs on a work session agenda, but we also want to assure you there are certain tasks in this work that we know needs to be done no matter what the scope might turn out to be, and rather delaying this important work, staff will proceed with a selected engineer to start some of that baseline work we know that's going to be needed. So we're not delaying the work, but before we finalize the full scope, we'll have a check-in with you to make sure we're all on the same page with that. And we had one of our quarterly coordination check-in meetings this week, yesterday with UNC hospitals. Meg and Ben were there as always with their colleagues, including the hospitals. And it's our intent to also share this draft scope of work with those key stakeholders before it's finalized. So we hope to have that meeting and discussion with them before the board sees it on February 14th. And I think John mentioned earlier, we no longer need the December 20th NERTS committee meeting on forestry management, since we did a good job yesterday on that.
We are planning to schedule one in maybe second half of January, early February.
Yes, yeah, after we did the full board check on the 10th, yes, it's very likely that will need to happen. And we still need to get a HR committee meeting scheduled with you on retiree health and 457 compensation. And Andy, were there what other changes am I forgetting to note? And, and as far as action items, I'll update my key focus areas to include the board's suggestion on diversity and inclusion. And you also made some good comments on updating the strategic trends report, and we'll address that as well.
First of February.
Yeah, that's the one on retiree health and
Yeah.
457 that we need to get scheduled.
Okay.
Yeah, so Balls and Stephen and Stephanie's court to get up with you to get that scheduled.
Is there a point when the banking RFP comes back?
Banking RFP coming back to the board?
As I recall, we had incorporated all the board's input on that, and it's just up to staff to get it done.
Is there a schedule for that? Like how long that takes? From receive when you're getting the RFP out and like when you expect.
Yeah.
All that complete.
I gave that. I gave a time on that to you once, and now I'm not remembering, but it's. I want to say 6 to 9 months from the time we issue the report, maybe from the time we get the report drafted and then get the responses back and do all the evaluations.
Okay.
And, we've got what we need from you. We've got a skeleton of the plan, but it's going to require a fair amount of effort to put it together, and we've just not gotten to it, but we're committed to it, obviously.
Thanks.
Any other comments? Okay, so it looks like we're finished our board meeting for the day, so we're adjourned. Thank you.
That's hard for you to follow. Well, I had actually printed it out and left the office. So I.